looks like my Linda's place.
Yeah, yeah, mine.
Good.
Yeah. So it's my networking point, but the questions are good.
Oh. What about Svetlana? She's not here.
No, she went back
You go with the jiggle first.
in Albania yesterday
go.
with the
But let's close the door.
Prime Minister. We are expecting some
Cool. Good luck.
hopes.
Okay, I hope so too, but that would be great.
No, I doubt.
But, you know, I know they're still working on it.
Yesterday they voted somehow, but I doubt that now the Macedonians are going to accept
The trouble, right, the position that they've taken now, they rejected the French law.
So here we are. Hello and good morning to everybody, distinguished speakers, partners, journalists who traveled with us from the Western Balkans, ladies and gentlemen present in the room, and everybody who is already connected with us online. There is an old saying, and I'll start with that. If you want to know, just ask, which leads us to the decision that RCC has taken since years to conduct its own surveys on the Western Balkans. So a warm welcome to all of you on this 20th launch edition of the Balkan Barometer, back to back with the yesterday EU Western Balkan Summit. And here I have to stop a bit before we go in the details of the Balkan Barometer. You know usually how draft speeches are prepared. So you go in the substance with some talking points that are prepared, and then you just leave some dots to be filled if anything will change at the last moment. That was what we were trying yesterday until late, let's say, or before late afternoon, to see how these, let's say, dots in the speech would be filled with some positive, encouraging messages coming from the EU Western Balkan Conference, or would any, or even more frustration, spill over the work and the sentiments that are already present in the region. So yesterday, I have to say, unfortunately, that for the Western Balkans, it was a day composed of different frustrations. There was no opening of accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. And for somebody like myself and some of the colleagues in this room that have spent more than 20 years of their life, almost the whole political, but not only, the whole professional career, working in the story of the EU enlargement and the EU accession perspective of our countries. And for others as well, partners, European Commission, who has been working day and night on making this story plausible. For all the other member states who have always been staunch supporters in this story, yesterday was a really hard day. It was a day of compounded frustrations, as I said, for not only for Albania and North Macedonia, but it was I have to say, it was really, really frustrating to see that not even visa liberalization for Kosovo was mentioned at the end of the conclusions. And you know that this is a story that you keep listening every time. And I have to say, on the visa liberalization of Kosovo, I hardly can meet anybody out of all the think tankers in Brussels and elsewhere to say that, you know, yes, but maybe they still have to compile some files, they still have to meet some requirements. No, everybody recognizes the fact that the story of no visa liberalization of Kosovo is really not only long overdue, but it's becoming the most frustrating point for all the citizens of Kosovo, especially for the youngsters who cannot travel freely in Europe. Then we had the Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is a very difficult country, yes, I have to admit, but a country where the sentiments of the war have been on the rise when the war in Ukraine started. And my people working with us at the RCC, they can be witness of that. How many days we're texting with each other, trying to kill like those human fears and uncertainties. Is any war coming back here in the region? Does this really mean that Bosnia-Herzegovina is the next country and not occasionally mentioned by those in Russia, that might be the weakest part of the chain in the Balkans? So no to Bosnia-Herzegovina, potential candidate country yesterday. And again, nothing on Montenegro and then Serbia. Okay, it was a great day for Ukraine and Moldova. And I really feel good that at a certain moment of time, the decision to grant the candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova happened yesterday. But again, as I said, we speak of sentiments, and like when you have a survey, when you have a barometer, the first thing that you try to measure are the sentiments. And that's what our survey, our public survey, has been doing since years, to measure the citizens' perceptions and sentiments. Those sentiments, if this survey would have happened today, I dare to say, might have been pretty different. So please, while I'll be giving to you some figures and you'll be able to check all of those a bit later in the afternoon on our webpage, keep in mind that these editions of Balkan Barometer and Securimeters have been launched ahead of the war in Ukraine. We'll be trying to repeat some of the questions, especially when it comes to the security threats by full time, to see how the perceptions have changed. But keep in mind that given the current situation, these figures might have been different. So back to the, let's say, pre-cooked talking points. While many things change, our public and business perception surveys remains the truthful source of all the sentiments in the region. There are different times when the results surprise us. Sometimes those serve to us as a wake-up call, while on other occasions they confirm that our efforts are not in vain, as citizens and businesses feel the benefits of our work. 76% of Western Balkan citizens find regional cooperation a great approach. And this is figure number one I want you to remember while leaving this room. Remember that figure because it's more than even ourselves at the RCC working every day on the regional cooperation expect it to be. The EU membership continues to enjoy the support of the majority of the citizens by 60%. But as I started earlier, Not everything is rosy, and we noticed with worry that for the first time in 8 years, there is an increase of the pessimism among the citizens. Nearly 1 in 3 think that their country will never join EU. This is also weighing heavily even on us, on our work. And consider that 6 points increase of pessimism in a year is not just a figure. At the same time, 60% of Western Balkan business community as well consider their economy's EU membership as a good thing in terms of their business. And this is the figure number 2 I would like you to remember. Why business is so supportive? Because business is the first to foster partnership and business relations, and they always look for the most serious, solid partners within the vicinity of their own countries. A lot of business community in the Western Balkans is composed mostly from small and medium enterprises. More importantly, the small and medium enterprises account for more than 72% of total employment in the region. They are the key to foster economic growth, innovation, social inclusion, and job creation. We keep saying that being European is a state of mind, and the citizens of the Western Balkans plus the business community not only recognize this, but they also try hard to run their business as efficiently as possible. Now, we know that the war in Ukraine has already shifted many perspectives. The war has awakened the spirits of the past by bringing up a lot of security concerns. We cannot overlook the deep apprehension that has settled across our region, which is being increasingly faced with the security, energy security challenges, and economic implications of the war in Ukraine. The war also has its impact on the information space of the Western Balkans. The transnational nature of disinformation makes capable the disinformation campaigns seeking to promote anti-Western sentiments and threatening the stability of the Western Balkans travel freely from one geographical domain to another one. 74% of respondents agree that disinformation is a security threat to their economies. And this is the figure number 3 I would like you to remember. Securimeter shows that false news or news misrepresenting reality remain widespread for 47% of the people in the region. And they would expect much more from the media and journalists not to spread disinformation. It is somewhat striking that in the eyes of the public, journalists and press, plus the broadcasting management team as well, we know that journalists have a boss and the CEO as well, are among the 3 top spreaders of disinformation, considered so by 46% and 33% of them, respectively, but at the same time, they are seen as the ones mostly responsible to stop the spread of the fake news. Addressing security challenges remains highly important, and this is especially the case with the 5 biggest challenges the region is facing, and the citizens confirm that these are the main and the major worries for them. Serious and organized crime, 91%. Financial crime, 89%. Terrorism, 88%, as well as disinformation, 86%. Violent extremism, 85%, and natural disasters, 85%. 1 in 3 citizens, again and again, see corruption as a major threat to their lives. So please remember that on all the security threats, citizens have almost the same level of worries. And here we are at number 4, or figure number 4 that I would like you to remember. More than 80%. We did not beat around the bush, but we asked people to give us a clue about the 2 most important problems in their economies. And unsurprisingly, we know that already. They keep saying the economic situation is considered the biggest challenge by 47% of the citizens. Unemployment comes in second with 39%, considering it detrimental for their economy. You'll be having a panel afterwards, and I would really like very much to listen from them why the citizens in the region think that unemployment is the second in the rank of the biggest problems. Not because there are more jobs in there, but because more people are leaving. And at least that's our interpretation. But in order to make like the correlation of all the figures in there, definitely one needs to go through the whole instrument, the whole Balkan barometer, and see how figures and questions correlate with each other. So people, yes, they need to know that they will have an income. They need to know that they will be able to provide for their children and that they can afford the health care expenditures whenever that might be needed. Along the same lines, the most pressing concern for young people are inadequate employment opportunities, as stated by 63% of citizens. But 67% of young people between 18 and 24 years are considering to live and work abroad. This figure is a demonstration of societies which are empty. And this is the figure number 5 that I would like you to leave this room. It seems we are still yet not done. The judicial systems remain the least independent from the political influence for an average of 2/3, 66% of the citizens. Only 1/5, 21%, trusts the political parties, while 75% do not. And this is the figure number 6. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, on average, people living in the Western Balkan cities lose up to 1.3 years of their life due to the air pollution. The population is exposed to some of the highest concentrations of air pollution in Europe, which is 5 times higher than the one prescribed in the EU guideline levels. The citizens in the region, 67%, are well aware of climate change being a very serious or somehow a serious problem for their lives. 66% view pollution in their place of living as problematic. And here we are at the figure number 7. Addressing environment and climate change challenges is not a desirable option. It is the only sustainable way forward. Then there are some positive news because we used to take the bad with the good. And you reap what you sow is at least coming true when it comes to the roaming free in the region. Since the implementation of the roaming agreement in the Western Balkans as of last July, there has been an increase of roaming usage by 500%. And by this, we keep convincing and telling to ourselves every day that yes, that was really one of the hardest fights we had at the RCC during the last years, but at least it was worth the effort. This is the 8th figure that I want you to remember when leaving this room. And finally, I can say this is a great and a positive one. The impact of regional roaming agreement was well spotted in the business circles, where 43% of business admitted having a positive impact on their business operations. We are surely continuing our roaming journey, and we are investing, not only RCC, definitely, together with DG Connect, NEAR as well, and plus the most important ones in this story, the telecom operators. We are trying to invest a lot, and we are doing it actually, I have to say, sizable efforts in the regulatory dialogue with the EU and the member states in order to have a tailor-made approach to reduce the roaming charges between EU and the region. This is not going to be as hard as the roaming free in the Western Balkans was. It's going to be the hardest exercise that we have embarked for the next years. So here I'm coming to an end. But why I kindly asked you, amidst a lot of interesting figures that can be of great use to formulate policies and face challenges, to remember only 8 figures from the Balkan Barometer and Securimeter. First, because no one can remember all the numbers, and I know that that can be confusing. Secondly, and most importantly, the 8 figures are powerful and create a cascade of dynamics present in the Western Balkans. There is no EU perspective supported at the level of 60%, without the regional cooperation supported by 76% of people. But 76% supporting the regional cooperation can be a smaller number next year if the story of EU enlargement will continue as it ended yesterday. There are less chances to convince the tough liners at the EU that we will cause no problems to EU if still corruption, organized crime are a concern for more than 80% of the citizens in the region. And we know that. It will be hard to innovate and upskill the region while trying to turn it into a great investment hub if 67% of youth would like to leave. Well, Instagram and Facebook connect people, but disinformation is a threat to national security worldwide and is connecting them faster. Here, the region is aligned fully in sharing the same concern with the rest of the world. The same goes on air pollution. It affects disproportionately people everywhere, and statistics here can only serve to recognize again the fact that air pollution and environmental challenges know no borders. And finally, where there is a will, there is a way. That is the lesson learned from the Rome Like at Home the region embarked on and successfully made it happen. I'm sure this and more will be discussed further today, as there is no going back, at least from this. So the old slow local world is gone. We are all living in a different one, where the global challenges are affecting us all and where the level of insecurities is high among every single citizen living these hard days of war in Europe, but as well of different and hard realities in the Western Balkans. So thank you for coming. I wish you all quite a vibrant attention to follow the next panel. And here I'm done. I'm not going to keep this stage for longer, but I will invite now with great pleasure Radu Magdin, who accepted to moderate the panel. And by welcoming Radu in here, I'm leaving this panel in good and professional hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the vibe, the energy, the enthusiasm. I think we need this even after hard days, or I would say even particularly after hard days. Speaking of hope management, for me, it's a big pleasure to be here from a multiple perspective. I worked here in Brussels for 5 years. So it's good to be back and also introduce further some top EU perspectives. Second of all, as a Romanian and our EU and NATO path, I know a thing or two about hope management, but also disappointment management. Remember that we were a little bit disconnected from the Visegráds, and we had to applaud, and we were happy for them coming in a few years before us in the EU and NATO. And then we finally joined as well. And third, but not last, I had the pleasure to start my career in our foreign ministry where I dealt with the Western Balkans. So I have skin in the game, and I'm very happy to be here today. A word of two on organization. So the scenario is as follows. We're going to start with some top EU and national voices, and then we're going to be moving more in depth with some of our top experts from the region on looking into the results of the barometer. And speaking of will and way, let us see some of the top insights from Brussels and from national capitals in context on the way forward. So I'm happy to introduce first Mrs. Alexandra Wieser, Deputy Head of Unit from DG NEAR, European Commission. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank RCC for the great work they're doing on these and many other initiatives. Your role is crucial, and the results of the survey actually are testimony to some of the hard work you are doing. I also want to thank you for having invited me, and for me to have the pleasure to do that today, to open and to give some remarks. And it's also good to be here for the first time physically. I mean, I think I was here last year online. So now this year we are all present in a physical way. I also want to highlight that for us, the work that RCC is doing with the Balkan barometer and the spirometer is of great value. The surveys are taking the pulse is not a pulse on one day. It's a pulse which somehow goes beyond what could have been the impact of disappointment one day. So it does, in my view, provide quite a good sense of what are how the citizens and the businesses of the Western Balkans perceive their situation in the region and the work with the EU. And it's an important tool for us to tailor our policies and also measure the extent of social transformation, which is very crucial for the European path of the Western Balkans. Melinda asked us to remember 8 figures. I think I've noted some which for us are quite telling. I think the 76% of Western Balkan citizens supported cooperation is very important. It's a very high figure, and it acknowledges that regional cooperation can improve political, economic, and security situation in the Western Balkan region. I would echo the fact that particularly milestones like the Rome, like at Rome regime is certainly crucial in terms of showing to the citizens and businesses in the Western Balkans the impact of closer regional economic cooperation. I would also mention the work done by the region on the green lanes immediately after the start of the pandemic as positive elements influencing this trend. And this should give impetus to the region to continue on further regional economic integration. There are many more milestones which are important. And I think the key issue here is that we're talking about something which is in the hands of the region for the region. I also think that, there has been a decrease, but 60% of both citizens and businesses see EU membership in a positive light. I think it's still quite a considerable proportion, and it's a clear signal that the Western Balkan citizens see Europe as their ultimate destination of travel. It's also important that EU remains the most preferred partner for trade and investment at 69%. And I'm happy to see that people in the Western Balkans associate economic prosperity with EU membership. And this underlines also the importance not only for regional economic integration, but also for closely integrating the Western Balkan economies with the European Union. Now, the past year has been very challenging. We have had the impact of the COVID crisis still affecting the region. And secondly, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is impacting in a very severe manner on both the EU and Western Balkans on many fronts, from energy to disruption of trade and value chains to increasing cyber attacks and disinformation, just to quote a few. Now, the Balkan barometers highlights, that was also quoted by Melinda, that unemployment and the economic situation remains the 2 main concerns for the Western Balkan citizens. And I would also put together with this also the fact that there is, and this comes from the security meter, concerns that overall the security situation has not improved. And particularly, there are very high figures in terms of concern of citizens when it comes to serious organized crime, financial crime, and terrorism. And this brings me to the fact that these 2 areas are areas where the EU and the Western Balkans are working together to meet these challenges. On one hand, to accelerate economic recovery as well as green transition, the EU has put together and launched the Economic and Investment Plan for the Western Balkans, which is also important to meet the upcoming challenges in the energy sector arising from the war in Ukraine. And this plan echoes with the EU priorities for more prosperous, greener, more digital, and better connected region. And it's important also the emphasis on the green, given the concerns that the citizens in the Western Balkans have with regards to their environment. It's also important, on the other hand, together with giving an impetus to the economic situation, to continue on structural reforms including the field of rule of law, addressing corruption and organized crime, in order to provide the right environment for businesses to flourish, local businesses, but also for direct foreign investments to come, and maximizing the impact of investments under the Economic and Investment Plan. Equally important is inclusive regional economic cooperation, the common regional market, bringing together the region closer, a market of 18 million people, is at the core of the European Investment Plan, and it aims to facilitate the region's long-term recovery, bring it closer to the EU, and create much needed jobs for the benefit of businesses and citizens. Regional cooperation is also important to counter the impact of the ongoing war in Ukraine on the economies and security in the Western Balkans. And the current geopolitical context has shown even more the importance of enlargement policy as an investment of stability. We had yesterday an historical day in the sense that the application of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia were considered by the Council, which has granted candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova, and the European perspective to Georgia, following the Commission's opinion. I think it's very telling that these countries, as soon as the war exploded, have submitted an application to join, acknowledging the importance of the EU as a beacon of stability and prosperity. It was regretful yesterday that we were not able to start fully fledged negotiation with Albania and North Macedonia. We do understand disappointment in the region, but efforts are ongoing, and we do hope that a solution will be found soon to move forward with the GCs for both countries. Equally, we hope that there will be progress on visa liberalization for Kosovo. Let me also conclude by saying that enlargement is and remains a merit-based progress. To further progress on the EU path, the government of the region need to continue to deliver on reforms. And as also the sentiment of businesses and citizens show, further work is required on rule of law, fight against corruption and organized crime. Faster, tangible results on reform will not only mean moving faster in the EU path, but is also, and most importantly, what citizens in the region expect and what they deserve to have. I hope that next year, during the launch of a new edition of the Balkan Barometer, we will be able to see improvements on all of these indicators, and we hope to see continuing improved positive perception of regional cooperation and European integration. So I do look forward also to the discussion in the panel later today. Thank you.
Thank you too so much for a very interesting set of comments. The focus on trade and investments and the perception of the EU stressing reforms, stressing the fact that indeed we need to see some progress also in terms of hope management for the region, Albania, North Macedonia, and progress on visa for Kosovo. Now, our next panelist is online. We have a strong Italian voice joining us from Rome. It's Andrea Cascone. He's Adriatic and Western Balkans Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Thank you, Italy, for long-standing support to the region and to this event. So, Andrea, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Actually, I'm not even in Rome, but on my travel, so that prevents me from being there with you, and I really apologize for that. But I wanted to be with you this morning because I think this is a very timely event, a very useful presentation, and let me assure you that Melinda's message on what happened yesterday, it's very much in line with the same feelings we have here in Rome. As your security meter report clearly shows, I mean, perceptions on security in the region have significantly deteriorated. War in Ukraine is impacting considerably on the region, which has already been under huge stress over the past 2 years. Now, against this background, Italy remains firmly convinced that re-energizing the European integration process of the Western Balkans is of the utmost urgency. This is the time to show the real ambition of the European Union as a global player. This is the time to fulfill the historical mission of the European Union by bringing under the European rules all those countries that belong to Europe. and definitely Western Balkans are part of this family. The conclusions adopted by the European Council on Western Balkans are very far from what are the expectations of the citizens of the region. We're fully aware about that. This is why Italy will continue to stubbornly pursue and push for a concrete acceleration of the process. Securimeter, Barometer, and the other reports that are produced and introduced today provide unique strategic asset for the governments in the region in order to assess public perception and sentiment on key issues for policy and decision makers. So just let me conclude by saying big kudos to our RCC team for having delivered once again an excellent contribution in this direction. We're proud to be your partner in this endeavor, and we'll look forward to continue our close cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very to the point, very impactful presentation. Let me just stress one or two points. Re-energizing the Western Balkans enlargement is an urgency. We can't be complete as a family without the Western Balkans. And I love this historic mission completion, which is important. So perhaps if this is Eastern Partnership 2.0 June, perhaps we can have a Western Partnership, Western Balkans autumn. Thank you so much. Last but not least, from the introductory remarks on behalf of the EU Presidency, from the Permanent Representation of France to the EU, Mrs. Marie Delille. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to all of you, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to convey the apologies from Mr. Frédéric Mondeloni, Director for Continental Europe at the Foreign Ministry of France, who unfortunately was not able to be with us today. Last December, Mr. Mondeloni had the pleasure to open, together with the Secretary General, the annual RCC Jumbo Security that France co-organized in Paris. He had then insisted on the importance of regional cooperation in addressing collectively all the major developments and security challenges of the Western Balkans, and the crucial role of the RCC as a political platform linking regional cooperation and EU integration. France fully supports this role as a member both of the RCC board and the EU, and also currently the rotating presidency of the EU Council that will come to an end in a few days. 6 months later, the evolutions have reinforced this statement. As it has already been mentioned by other panelists, the war in Ukraine has serious implications for the whole Europe. In particular, Southeastern Europe has to deal with the various consequences of the conflict, as movements of refugees, energy security, economic turbulences, and also the challenges of a common political stance against Russian aggression against an independent and sovereign state. Regional cooperation is for us the best solution to face this new reality. As you know, President Macron had announced already in December that Western Balkans would be one of our priorities during the French presidency, and we have continued our strong commitment for the region during all the semester. Yesterday, as it has already been mentioned, a leaders meeting gathered here in Brussels, the 20 heads of states and government from the EU and their counterparts from the Western Balkans back to back to the European Council. Many important issues have been discussed, such as energy, youth, security. I would have preferred to be able to welcome a positive decision on opening negotiation with Albania and North Macedonia, but I would like to reaffirm that France has been and is still strongly committed to try to achieve an agreement allowing the opening of negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, because these two countries have made all the necessary reforms, and these steps is well deserved. We hope that we will have a positive outcome before the end of the French presidency. For all these questions, the Balkan Barometer and the Security Meter constitute an important tool. They are a concrete application of the idea that the region is a whole, and is faced with common problems and common perceptions, especially regarding the European integration. The existence of this survey is essential for understanding the regional expectations and trying to give the best possible answers to them. It's particularly useful that the survey also questions the feeling of the Balkan public opinions towards the EU, because we all know that the enlargement dynamic cannot exist only with governments and negotiators, but needs an impetus from all the citizens in the region. The figure of 76% supporting the regional cooperation is in this regard very important. The result should be for all a food for thought about the policies and also the narrative that the EU has to promote in cooperation with the RCC and the local authorities in this regard. I would also like to stress the importance of having a specific survey for questions related to security. This kind of survey has already been a useful tool for the initiative that we launched with Germany in 2017 against small arms and light weapons in the Balkans. And as we extend the scope of regional security initiatives to new fields like cybersecurity, for instance, the security matter will be closely monitored every year. As a presidency will come to an end in a few days, I would like to reaffirm once again that France will remain firmly committed in supporting the RCC's work and through that the European integration of the Western Balkans. In particular, we will continue to provide our support to the implementation of the common regional markets, and we hope that the agreements prepared by the RCC will be signed as soon as possible. Also, we will support RCC's efforts in securing a roaming-free agreement between the Western Balkans and the European Union. Regarding security, we will also continue to promote the idea of the RCC as a platform gathering the various security cooperation initiatives. In particular, we look forward to the RCC participating to the new regional training center on cybersecurity and cybercrime for the Western Balkan countries, a project we developed with Slovenia and that President Macron officially announced yesterday during the leaders' meeting. And finally, on behalf of the French authorities, I would like to congratulate the RCC for this new edition of the Balkan Barometer and wish you all of us a fruitful debate. Thanks.
Un grand merci. Thank you so much. Just to underline some of the key issues which were mentioned here, including, I think we should understress this regional center for cybersecurity, speaking of concrete solutions for the future. And speaking of commitment to the common regional market, I think it's a strong signal, the one. I know this is a lasting and standing and strong issue for the RCC, the idea of a roaming-free Western Balkans EU relationship. Now, thank you so much to our introductory speakers. What will happen next is the following. We will have a first video on outlining the results of the barometer. We'll be then moving into the panel with our first two speakers, then a video on the security meter, then finally the last two speakers, then we conclude. Thank you so much, and let's see the first clip. Thank you so much for this very good visualization. Our first speaker in the panel is going to be online. So I suggest we give the floor now to Jensian Elezi. He's an RCC consultant on the Balkan Barometer on Securimeter 2022 from the Albanian Center for Competitiveness and International Trade. And he will guide us through the essential numbers for the economy, right? Issues relating to unemployment, and not only. We're going to give him the floor, and then me together with Balbona, the second speaker, will be joining the floor here, not before listening also online to Dimitri from Bulgaria. Yeah, so let's hear first from Jensian online.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I hope you can hear me well. Well, first of all, it's really a pleasure participating at this event and the panel, and having the opportunity not only to deliver a few remarks, but also explain a bit further regarding the results of this year reports. Well, as you might well know, the barometer has been around for a few years now, and so there's plenty of data each year, which it's very interesting also for researchers to be able to compare from each year and also see how different events can reflect and impact the citizens' perception and business perceptions. This year, we see a few things that are quite interesting. I will try not to repeat what was already said and presented. First of all, we see a bit of a difference between citizens' perception and business perception. The business community appears to be a bit more optimistic in some regard. In addition to that, we see an increasing worry on some of the issues that were mentioned. I will try to focus on a few issues that we with my colleagues consider important from this year report. First of all, some good news after what was mentioned following also the summit of yesterday that did not present good news for the Western Balkans. This year's report actually gives us some perspective in that sense. First of all, we see that unemployment, as it was mentioned, is going down as a threat, but this has been a constant throughout the years. And it does not necessarily mean that there is not a worry on unemployment. It's still quite high. More than a third of citizens are worried about it. But we see a raise in awareness regarding the overall economic situation. And if we cross the data and we dig a bit further, we see that this decrease in the worry of unemployment is compensated by other very worrying factors such as corruption or brain drain and the fear of emigration growing, which has been a concern in the recent years. So it's a returning of a concern. So in this regard, we probably shouldn't be as satisfied or happy with the citizen explaining less worry of unemployment. However, there are some good elements that could be mentioned because we see citizens becoming more and more pragmatic each year in their responses. And they, for example, regarding what is important in finding a job, speaking of unemployment in the Western Balkans, now we see, the good news is we see an increase in numbers of those who claim that having a good education and qualifications is crucial for finding a job today. So this is quite remarkable. On the other hand, there is still a good portion that sees employment in government or public sector as preferred one. But this has been declining quite considerably each year, especially from last year. As I mentioned earlier, businesses are a bit more optimistic than the citizens in this regard. And there is an important figure that we recorded this year, which is that 77% of businesses are quite confident that their products can well compete in the European EU market. This is quite a big increase from compared to last year, 14 points, which might be also explained due to the circumstances in the market with the COVID crisis and new opportunities that might have come up together with, of course, the impact of the crisis. So we see businesses a bit more prepared and more willing to integrate. And as it was mentioned by the Secretary General, businesses appear to have, of course, a better capacity to connect with their EU counterparts. It was mentioned about the strong EU support, and I would not spend too much time on that. And it was mentioned, of course, that there is an increase in pessimism, reaching at 28% of people believing that membership will never happen. But I would like to mention another figure, which is more than 22% of citizens expect their economy to integrate by 2025. Which shows us also a bit of low level of information or lack of information regarding the process or let's say overall functioning of the process regarding the EU membership. Then going through the few last points regarding let's say pessimistic figures or troubles and problems that Western Balkans are facing. Of course, it was mentioned that trust in institutions is still quite low and political parties are still deteriorating in that sense. But when it comes to effectiveness in fighting corruption, there is one element that I would like to point out that, well, first of all, only every 5 businesses, only 1 believes that the authorities are doing a good job in fighting corruption. So it's quite a low number. But I would like to point out that they blame mostly, or they rate at lowest point courts, of course. And we know that in general, the rule of law and the judiciary system is rated quite low. But a new element that is increasing is also civil society organizations. So they are rated quite low by businesses as poor, very poor in contributing to fight corruption. This, of course, might be related also to expectations, but also to a damage in their image throughout the years. But it's something definitely to look up to, since civil society organizations are crucial in helping democratization and why not exposing and fighting corruption, or helping to fight corruption. In this regard, it's important to note also the importance that citizens give to digitalization of public services in fighting corruption. This varies between the countries, and it reflects also their own pace on implementing such reforms. We see a different pattern within the region, but it's definitely a positive signal that citizens believe that offering digital public services can improve the fight against corruption, and by limiting, of course, interaction with civil servants. And a very final remark regarding migration as a threat coming from the security matter of this year. Well, it is a relative majority that expect this to become a bigger problem. It's 41%. And incoming migrants are seen as an increased security risk for the region and remains nearly as widespread as last year's security matter. And it is shared by 2/3 of the citizens that were asked to reply. So this is despite the fact that when you dig a bit further and asking them if they have had personal negative experiences with irregular migrants, 61% of them claims that they haven't. So there is a need to work more on that, and it's a bit peculiar, and probably we can go a bit deeper into that in the discussion later, that countries that are themselves emigrating also have this worry of migrants coming in from other countries. A very final remark, which is a new element added to the security matter this year, but I think it's worth mentioning, is also that domestic violence is also seen as a serious security threat in the Western Balkans, with 72% replying to this. And there are some interesting figures in the security matter regarding this element as well. So to conclude, I would say that when we look into the reports and we see some clear differences between the business community perception and the citizens one, the public opinion perception. We see a bit more informed in the case of business opinion, and this is clearly coming from their better connections and network with the business community in the EU, while we see an increase of pessimism in citizens in their responses. So thank you.
Thank you too very much, Jensian, and please remain with us. A lot of very, very interesting points to make. I'll also be raising during the first round of questions some of these issues. In the meantime, let us start with our next speaker, Dmitry Bechev, who is a visiting scholar with Carnegie Europe from the context. And yes, for the moment, after yesterday, Moldova and Ukraine have momentum, and this is not necessarily the best of mornings, let's say, for the Western Balkans. But starting from here, Dimitar, how do you see, and Dimitar is joining us online, how do you see the prospects for the EU-Western Balkans relationship in the weeks and months forward? And separate from that, one of your niches of expertise is also energy security. How do you see development in the field in the wider context of the EU-Western Balkans relationship? You have the floor.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I hope the quality of the sound is decent. I'm in the middle of another conference and there is a break around me. But yeah, it's a difficult question to tackle, especially given the timing. Yesterday, we had the EU Council. And if you sat in any of the Western Balkan countries, you wouldn't, I mean, we will be struggling not to be disappointed with the outcome. There were expectations that Albania and North Macedonia will be finally given a go-ahead for their membership talks. And in the case of North Macedonia, the wait has been very long because the European Commission originally assessed Macedonia be ready for membership negotiations as far back as 2009, and 13 years later, here we are. So given that it was Ukraine and Moldova generating the headlines with their candidacy status, the frustration was clear amongst the commentators. Even more so, Edi Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister, tapped into the sentiment when he very undiplomatically put Bulgaria on the spot for basically hijacking the process or kidnapping the process, and rightly so. There was also a big question hovering in the air around the EU-Western Balkans summit, because at some point Vučić and Rama were just floating the prospect of not attending at all, which would have been a major embarrassment. So the relationship is not in a good shape, let's not fool ourselves, because there is lack of commitment on both ends. But since we are discussing the report, I might call back to some of the figures that the previous speakers dangled. I mean, of course, we have 60% support for membership, and it's only natural given the geopolitical situation, given political trends, the economic interdependence between regions, societies, and so on and so forth. But I suggest that there is a strong sense of Euro-realism, something that Dejan Jovic and I discussed a decade ago when Croatia was about to join. What is realism, Euro-realism, supposed to me? Well, it means that membership is desirable, and I think the benefits are well understood. But then again, nobody's starry-eyed about the prospects of actually joining. Secondly, 60% is all nice, but it's an aggregate figure. There's some variance across the 6 countries of the Western Balkans. There was an Ipsos survey regarding Serbia, where for the first time, actually citizens who are skeptical or against joining the EU are slightly, the percentage is slightly higher than those who favor joining the Union. And it should be a warning sign. Now, I don't think that's set in stone, that there is a major shift in public opinion, because if we conduct a thought experiment, and tomorrow there is a referendum in Serbia on joining, there will be probably 50% plus in favor, but it reflects the cooling down of expectations. Now, I also think that there is a problem of leadership in the Western Balkans because, of course, Rama, Vucic, Kovacevski, and the rest might voice their disappointment that they're acting in good faith. But at least in the case of several of those people in charge, I think the current status quo is not something they can be actively pushing against. In other words, the interregnum where there is the promise, but also there is the realization that at best EU is a long prospect. This interregnum is a very comfortable environment, especially if you have member states undermining the credibility of the EU, because it allows for political elites in the region to go on with business as usual, to pay lip service to the goal of reforming and strengthening democracy, improving governance, but at the same time engage in the type of retail politics they're accustomed to, which also involves sort of control of the public sector, clientelism, increasing strong grip over the media, marginalizing civil society, and giving the opposition a hard time. We see this trend across the region, and again, Serbia would be a cautionary tale. In 2018, Freedom House downgraded Serbia from free to partially free, and we should already set alarms. That's a front-runner country for joining the EU. So this game of smokes and mirrors, where the EU is saying we want you, but there's little by way of follow-up, even against the backdrop of a major crisis and war, where you actually think that the geopolitical reasoning should make the policymakers in Paris, in Berlin, in Brussels, and so forth a bit more forward-leaning. Even in those circumstances, the reluctance to open the doors of the EU, even to actually signal to Montenegro, for instance, that accession is possible within the span of this decade. And given the pretense on behalf of regional elites, I think the situation is not encouraging. Now, one other thing I want to say is that it very much depends on your benchmark. If the benchmark is the post-Soviet space, if it's Ukraine, Moldova, and so on and so forth, I mean, the Western Balkans, it's not doing that badly because, again, there is a measure of stability. Hasn't been an economic collapse. There's a safety valve of migration. I mean, geography is destiny as well. But then again, it's not what we as academic community, but also you as practitioners would aspire for. Remember the heady days around the Thessaloniki summit, where there was this bold vision that the Western Balkans will be following the trajectory of Central Europe. They'll develop economically, they'll close the gap in governance, and they'll consolidate democracy. And that's obviously not happening. So it depends. You can be on the half full side, but I think most people in the region, despite the figures, and maybe it's also underscored by some of the findings of the report, most people in the region, I think, are on the half empty side. So that's very roughly where I think we stand in the relationship between the EU and the region.
Thank you so much, Dimitar, for your initial points, and please remain with us for the remainder of the panel. Thank you for stressing realism. Gentian, remember, he stressed pragmatism, as things which are coming out of the polls, leadership, benchmarking. And now let us move to a second needed video, this time on the securimeter, and then we proceed with the rest of the panel.
I apologize, but I couldn't hear the question.
Ask a question. I was just kindly asking you to remain with us. And in the meantime, we're going to put the video. Thank you so much for another well done video. Now we'll be joining because we have a live speaker in this panel. Welcome, Valbona. I'm very happy to introduce you. She's the chair of the Strategic Initiative Department at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, and you have an extensive experience, not a unique niche, which makes things not so easy for me because it's easy when somebody is just an expert on disinformation, or in the economy and so on. So you deal with issues that have to do with the economy, migration, great power competition. And we have seen some of the data here highlighting both perceptions of threats on the economy, both perceptions on the role of migration and refugees in war context. And of course, we're competing for hearts and minds. For the moment, the EU is there, but we kept talking in the region about China, US, Turkey, and others. How do you find the story in between based on your research?
Well, Radu, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'd like to thank RCC and the Secretary General Bregu actually for these reports. For us as scholars, data and research from the region is very important. We can do qualitative analysis, but we still need those quantitative data. And I think what is important for these reports is that it's now a few years, and so we are starting to see the trends, and that is much more important than what people think in a particular moment. As I was listening to the introduction speeches and then the panelists, I kept changing my notes because sometimes, I felt like I'm repeating myself. We've been talking about these issues for the last 20 years. And in some areas, nothing has changed when it comes to the economic, situation, when it comes to immigration and other issues. So very interesting data, and I'm very much looking forward to looking at those much more carefully and studying it. I'll focus on 4 main points. Migration, the economic situation, which I think both are linked to each other. Trade, and here we can go also not just trade in general, the importance of regional cooperation, but also the influence of external actors and how they are increasing power and influence in the region. And also the last point, which is, I guess, the most important one, Ms. Bregu started the conversation on the EU membership, the EU integration of the region. So it was fascinating to see that 70% of the population, I might think it's even higher, want to leave the region. But what is interesting is that brain drain is is seen as one of the main security challenges now by 18% of the population. So that is increasing compared to just 2 years ago. And the question that was raised is, how come unemployment is not anymore so important like it used to be many years ago? Because people are finding solutions outside their countries. In one of the articles I wrote a couple of years ago, I said, if the EU will not go in the Western Balkans, it's easy. The Western Balkan people will go into the EU. So that is the solution that people have found. So it is the income and the institutional gap. So we have two types of immigrants from the region that drives migration. And then we have the push and the pull factors. The leaders in the Western Balkans cannot do much about the pull factors, but they can reduce the push factors. And those are a lack of meritocracy, corruption, weak institutions in the region. So I'm afraid that all these push and pull factors will continue, that drive immigration will continue to persist even in the future in the region. But what we're not doing is that we're not looking at the regional impact of migration and brain drain. And there are three main areas. We have to look at the labor market, what happens, the public purse, and the economic growth rate. Because as we're seeing now, brain drain and massive migration from the region is reducing productivity in these countries and also reducing competitiveness. Which brings me to the second point, that's the slow convergence of the region with the European Union. There was this hope 20 years ago that the gap will decrease very quickly and there will be convergence with the EU countries. Unfortunately, if we take the per capita incomes, it's only 14% of the EU average per capita income. And the other security challenges that we see there, of course, are corruption, and these are connected to each other. Now, what is difficult, and I think remains the challenge in the region, both when we look from the economic perspective and the migration perspective, is that we have permanent migration or lack of circular migration in the region. Remittances are seen as the main driver for consumption, mainly, not so much for investment, and make up 10% of the GDP on average in the region, with some countries such as Kosovo, which is 17%. Now, this is much higher than the foreign direct investment in the region, which makes less than 0.7% of the global foreign direct investment, when the EU countries are the main driver of FDI globally with more than 40%. And the entire region attracts less than 0.7%. Then there's another point regarding trade that was interesting. So I saw that China has become the third most favorite trading partner, 35% of the population. That's very much in line with the strategy that we have seen of Chinese economic influence. We talk about the EU remains the most important trading partner. However, China is the second largest single trading partner for almost every country in the region, with the exception of Kosovo. Not only trade, and this is very heavily tilted in favor of China, more than 80% of trade are Chinese imports than exports from the region, but also when it comes to foreign direct investment. 122 projects, Chinese projects, are currently being implemented in the region for $31 billion, which makes 40% of the stock of the foreign direct investment in the region. Now, it's not real FDI, but it's mainly loans, and that adds more layers of challenges. The last point is on the EU integration. I think we really need to change, even the narrative when we talk about the Western Balkans and the EU integration. I don't think it's about the Western Balkans anymore. I think it's about the EU. I came last night from a conference in Berlin, and we met with, politicians in the Bundestag and, senior representatives from the executive. It's about the EU. Enlargement has been the most important, the most successful foreign policy tool of the European Union. It's a political project, but unfortunately, for so many years has been wearing these technical clothes. And somehow the clothes became even more important than, you know, the project itself. So in the EU, we have seen since 2008, the economic crisis, financial crisis. Then in 2014, 2015, 16, we had the migration crisis. Then we have the war now, but actually the war has started in 2014. Right now, we have all these three crises together. So where is the EU gonna go? And how can the region of the Western Balkans, which is not the backyard anymore, but it's the front yard, if you look from the geopolitical competition that we're seeing now, considering Russia, China, and other external players. So I think we really need to change the narrative. And so my last point will be just a couple of recommendations. First, there's very much needed that the Western Balkan countries need to start accessing EU structural funds. So we need, you know, a gradual phasing in of these countries because of the big financial and infrastructure gap that exists between the Western Balkans and the Western European countries. Second, the Western Balkans need to be seen as part of the solutions for the EU. We talk about this Zeitenwende of Chancellor Scholz. It is a Zeitenwende because we have, you know, the European security has been based on a three-legged stool approach, which was receiving security from the United States, receiving cheap energy from Russia, and cheap markets from China. That is all changing now. So the Western Balkans need to be part of the solutions, be that on green energy, on green market, on nearshoring or ally shoring, which is the most, you know, preferable now expression. The third point is that the EU integration process in the region, unfortunately, has been very much elite-driven. That has to change. The civil society, the young people, the business community needs to be included in that process. The fourth point is that there's a need for much stronger and direct strategic communication from the European Union. All those data that we see of true that 60% still see the EU as the future, but only 22% think that the country will be a member of the European Union. That has to do with the strategic communication process of the EU. And then my final point is that I think the Western Balkans reforms of enlargement and the Western Balkans can really help reform the European Union too. You know, what needs to change in order for countries not to block each other will be a streamlining of the decision-making process in the EU, and that will be the qualified majority voting. That will not be important just for the Western Balkans, but also important for the other security challenges or external actors that the EU needs to take important decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for raising a lot of very interesting points. We'll have the privilege to address this first as a moderator on the first round, and then we open the floor. Before passing the floor to Professor Dejan Jovic, who is a full-time professor with the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Zagreb, I think that we're starting more and more to be pragmatic and realistic in talking about solutions and narratives. And I'm very happy that one of the conclusions of today's event is that, okay, we start after not necessarily the greatest day for science this week, but we're starting to look at what may happen in the future, including, like you mentioned recently, this two-way reform in between the Western Balkans and the EU. So if one end, you know, gets the stress on the reform, the other one must reform as well. Thank you so much. Dejan, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you very much. But there are a couple of things that I find interesting. And some of them points, for example, for me, the fact that 60% of the people in the Western Balkans support EU membership is surprising, and I think it will be next year much less. I think the decisions of yesterday, the fact that the most problems are being created by the EU member states to candidate countries than the other way around.
And would it be possible to speak a little bit louder? Let's see if there's something which can be done on your side or on yeah. If you could speak a little bit louder.
Do I need to repeat this?
it's a bit better.
Can you hear me better now?
Now it's better. It's better.
Okay, I'll keep this closer actually to the mouth. And I will repeat it in a way what I said. So I say basically that 60% of support for the EU membership is surprising to me. And I think next year we'll have much less support in the Western Balkans for EU membership. It seems to me that this will be almost an inevitable result of disappointment, the huge one that actually happened because of the decisions or non-decisions yesterday, but also of the fact that at present in the Western Balkans, it seems that more problems are being created by EU member states to candidate countries than the other way around. So that really seems to me to be a logical consequence. I think the follow-up support that I expect in the next years, or even if this survey is being conducted in a month time or something like that, will be a rational response to the fact that actually member states are creating problems in the West. And the other thing is, I think really that this on the security side, it seems to me, okay, well, 33% are unhappy with security situation in the region. But I think we neglect somehow that the Western Balkans at the moment is very peaceful. And in fact, it's not a generator of any insecurity. And I'm also a little bit unhappy to see that when in the European Union, and especially some member states of the European Union, they think of the Western Balkans, they have a rather wrong perception of the Western Balkans, based on stereotypes and prejudice, I think, which are results of a certain type of misinformation, fake news, and political agendas that, in fact, portrays the Western Balkans as the source of problems in Europe. I mean, for example, we still talk about security challenges from, I don't know, Bosnia-Herzegovina joining the Western Balkans in general, but we neglect the fact that in the last 27 years now, there has been no one single incident in security terms in Bosnia-Herzegovina, a country which actually had a horrible war and where nobody expected, in fact, back in 1993, 1994, that actually for 27 years after the ending of the war, there will be no attempt, basically, to start violence in any particular way. So I think a part of this, one of the reasons for this is also because sometimes political actors in the Western also do not really do enough to point out positive developments in the they themselves talk about an inevitability of a conflict, either in Montenegro or in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Pristina and Belgrade and so on. But we see no evidence to this. And I think this mismatching between the facts and perceptions is something that we need really to take into account seriously. For example, according to this survey, 21% of the people say they trust political parties and 79% do not. I think the old communist leaders would be very happy with this result because they argued all the way through that political pluralism is unnecessary and not really desired by the people. However, the reality is that although they don't trust political parties, people still do vote for them and vote for the same political parties and keep them in power in most of the countries of the region. They might be unhappy with political parties, but voters in Montenegro will, vote PPS and whatever, and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, HDZ, SDA, and SNSD, and so on and so forth. So for a very long time, actually, people do vote with the same political parties, or they basically say they don't trust them. So that is basically what I find really interesting in this report. I think we need to take it within the context critically as well. I don't think we should trust what people say. I mean, and take it that this is really true in general. And I think for that reason, I think it's a very good report because it opens up opportunities. It gives us opportunities to be critical and to discuss the reality in the lights of perceptions.
Dejan, thank you so much. With your kind permission, I would repeat part of your messaging to the people in the room, what I wrote down. So interesting points on the inevitable result of disappointment after yesterday's progress on Eastern Partnership countries, but not on the Western Balkans. Interesting aspect, namely the fact that more of the problems may be on the EU side than on the candidate countries side from the perspective of making announcements and progress. Then what you mentioned, the security side, but here, because we talked quite a lot in these barometers about perception, fake news and disinformation, effective sentiments across the region, but an interesting point on this time on the wrong perception on the Western Balkans, which has to do also with disinformation aspects. So how we perceive them, but also perhaps the political agendas. And this context, the example brought about war and peace and perceptions of war in a regional war context in Ukraine, that 25 years later after war in the region, you see no actual attempt to restart violence here. There is no clear evidence here, speaking of facts and perceptions. And at the same time, a final strong point of what I may call, with your permission, a power paradox, speaking of perceptions, disappointments on trust in institutions, and not only the fact that people still vote for the representatives right now and keep them in power. So despite of this, thank you so much. I hope I restated well your main points. We're just doing this as an audio checkup. Now I'll be doing in short, a first round of questions, because of course, after that, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for being today with us during the panel. Now, I'll be looking a little bit of my notes, and there are a lot of interesting points raised by each one of the speakers. Jensian, among the things you mentioned was this pragmatism that you see, right? And separate from that, the fact that, interestingly, people believe that there may be economic integration by 2025. Speaking of anchoring, right, in expectations by some of the leaders on their requests from the EU and so on. And here, you rightfully mentioned the lack of information. Now, my question is the following. Now we are after a summit, and we're partially disappointed in the morning. But what do you think will happen in 2024 or January 2025, where part of this, even enthusiastic businesses, will find out that it's not like they thought, you know? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for the question, Radu. It is indeed quite a difficult topic to tackle right now because, clearly there is a lack of information among citizens and businesses in general, although, as I mentioned, they're becoming more pragmatic. But it's difficult not just for them to understand what's going on, but even for sometimes experts and scholars, or us who need to go in public events and interviews and explain what's going on. Until a certain point, we use this rhetoric or this explanation that, well, since the EU has not been perceiving the threat of war for a long time, it's been 70 years in peace, it takes peace for granted. So it was a good topic. We used it for a while, you know, to justify why the EU is not focusing its attention in the Western Balkans. Well, there you have. Now peace is not taken for granted anymore, unfortunately, and they still, EU members and their decision making is not taking into account potential instability in the region. So unfortunately, if I may expand a bit on that, what we have faced is what some scholars have called this deepening of nationalization of enlargement policy. So domestic politics has become more and more penetrating, let's say, the enlargement policy, and domestic issues are reflected into the decision-making for broader issues. And this is shown from several studies, even one last year, very interesting one in France, where citizens were asked regarding their perception and opinion on membership of the Western Balkans. And the figures were quite, worrying and problematic, because a strong majority would not want them in the EU as members. So I think it's a very complex issue. So to predict and discuss what's going to happen next year, I foresee just this continuation of stagnation in the process, where everyone will keep saying similar things. Although sometimes we hear from Balkan leaders being a bit more, let's say, frank and open on their thoughts, but still, I see it very difficult for citizens and businesses to holding on to this strong support for EU membership, as we still see it, of course, in these years. I think that we will see a continuous, probably decrease in believing in this common path, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. I'm going to turn towards you right now. One of the things that was noticed in the poll was a certain disappointment on activity by civil society. And of course, it's very easy to blame the EU, civil society, business, politics, and so on. But speaking of energizing the debate and energizing people, one of the comments you make is that perhaps one of the problems is the fact that part of the leadership in the Western Balkans is pushing, in fact, towards the marginalization of civil society. And this may be a trend in some of the countries. What do we do forward? Speaking also of the debate, do we trust that this civil society will push back with its own energy? Can there be a partnership with that positive vibe we see in business, or should we rely more on Brussels and the donors? What's your perspective on this?
I guess that was a question directed to me. I mean, I'm somewhat more hopeful about civil society, because one lesson learned, I mean, again, at the risk of being too general, but one of the lessons learned from enlargement and the post-enlargement thing is that European perspective or even membership is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. The people who have a stake in democratic institutions and governance are the citizens, those who live in a certain place. So unless there's buy-in from the constituents, you cannot be hoping for a positive change. And to the extent that there's some silver lining in the Western Balkans, I precisely see it with the sort of bottom-up energy. And this is a new crop of activists. This is not the professional NGOs that we saw in the 2000s and the 1990s from the outside. A good case study would be the mobilization around the lithium mine in Serbia. Now, of course, there were several things going on around Rio Tinto. There was nationalist perception that foreigners are exploiting our resources, but also it was almost a plebiscite on the authoritarian governance style of Vučić. Secondly, you had people from across the board joining in. You had liberals, pro-European, pro-Western, the pro-Western crowd in Belgrade, all the way to hardcore nationalists. And it's only natural that you have those broad-ranging coalitions. The point to me is that the habit of participating, of taking a stance and pushing back against government is a healthy one. Now, I mean, it's wishful thinking to assume that will solve Serbia's democratic problem. It's not the case, because first of all, the elections on the 3rd of April, we saw that it's the ballot box that counts. And unless this energy transforms into political organization, political action, nothing good will come out. But then again, I think that there's some encouraging episodes in the Balkans. And the Macedonian case in 2016, 2015 was a positive example. But what I want to say basically is that in the absence of checks and balances, in the absence of properly functioning accountability through the media, the only way to sort of impose some limits, but also to call for accountability and transparency is through civil society. And yeah, I mean, civil society is fragmented. Some of it's it's not liberal at all. But it's a sign of health in those countries that actually there is a part of the population which is willing and able to stand up for their rights and to call for accountability. But again, let's not get carried away, because unless this trickles into the political system, it's hard to see a positive path.
Thank you so much for your comment. Now I'm moving towards Valbona, and you raised a lot of very interesting topics, but I think that two of them were even more, let's say, to the point based on previous research on current research. The one that you mentioned, previous research, the fact that, okay, if you don't let us into the EU, Western Balkans people will come to you. So the issue of migration, right, which will lead to depopulation of the area. On the second time, perhaps sometimes we cozy up and we're happy to see that the EU is still there at 60, 70% or whatever, right? Whereas in concrete terms or in relative terms, like you mentioned, the single partners, China, or in the future, perhaps other countries, you know, will be competing for the economics in the region. Looking EU leaders, because Western Balkans leaders are also European, and EU leaders in the sense that, hey, look, what do you want from life? I know you're busy with a lot of crises, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, we're going to remain without people, and with all due respect, some other countries will want, you know, give us a sense of hope based on this pragmatic relation. Let's work on a roadmap. Do you think there may be room for such a conversation?
Well, Radu, I mean, well, thank God we live in democracy and people are free to choose, you know, where to live and how to travel and, you know, where to, you know, conduct their life. So from this perspective, from the migration perspective, what the leaders can do is reduce those push factors that push people either for economic reasons or institutional reasons because they don't feel there is meritocracy, you know, institutions do not work well, to leave the region. So that is what the leaders can do. And the second point that I also mentioned before is that, you know, what can we do as the Western Balkans to be part of the solutions, not to be at the table as partners and not on the table always to be discussed about these countries. So, you know, what can we offer from the, you know, green energy perspective? I think, you know, what we're missing here is also that the Western Balkans are very important from the security dimension. Let's remember that last year, one of the biggest military exercises took place in the Balkans, Defender 21. It will be repeated, Defender 23. So the region, for its geostrategic location, position, is very important for security of Europe, and we saw that. So with, you know, all the challenges that we're seeing, we're going back to traditional challenges that I think, you know, it was mentioned from Demo too, is that let's see that from the pragmatic, from realistic perspective. But more realistic is also, it's a simple analysis, it's a cost-benefit analysis. The costs and the benefits of keeping the Western Balkans out from the, you know, European family. I believe that the cost will be much higher in the long term for the European Union. And you asked a point regarding, you know, the markets. I think is, you know, my recommendation also will be, and will be, we've been working with several colleagues on these ideas, recommendations, is that no matter the status of the Western Balkan countries in the EU, I think it's very important that once the countries have fulfilled the, you know, are aligned with the policies, have fulfilled the standards and the criteria, then they should become part of the internal market of the European Union, so the internal cluster. So it goes back to that gradual phasing in. But I think the economic perspective of, you know, integrating these countries is very important. With the Regional Cooperation Council, and I would like to congratulate the team, has done with, you know, raising the awareness about the importance of regional cooperation is key. And I see regional cooperation as, you know, the regionalization, which somebody might, you know, even look at that from the negative connotation. I think it's important for globalization. Countries have to figure out, understand that they're too small and too weak to be competitive on their own in the global market. So even 17, if we take all the market, 17 million, inhabitants, it's still too small for serious, foreign companies. So that is why we need to look more on that. And then external partners. The influence of China, and I can talk about that, is that it should be seen as part of the the Chinese interest in European Union. So it's not the region, it's not per se important. It's just as as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Belt and Road Initiative, and the aim is the European Union market. So that's why we see those massive Chinese investments in infrastructure that really are needed in the region. But I think the European Union institutions should look at the region more from the geopolitical, geoeconomic, strategic point of view rather than just simple economics.
Thank you so much for this comment. And Teshan, I'm coming back towards you, and you rightly pointed out the issue of perceptions, both political agendas and perceptions. And I have to be frank with you, I'm Romanian, so I know how it feels sometimes to to be perceived either well when compared with others, or either badly when compared with other camps, right? So, and perceptions matter. How would you change perceptions on the Western Balkans? What do you think it's lacking, leaving aside any political agendas? Because when you're talking about political agendas, you can always find reasons to point out something with somebody's image or not. But objectively speaking, right, looking at polls and perceptions, what do you think could be improved, or what should the Western Balkans leaders or people from the Western Balkans should be actively communicating in the future?
I think there are two groups in particular somehow stigmatized, especially by, I would say, nationalist, extreme right groups in the member states of the European Union. We feel that, and one is Muslims in general. That is then related to migrants, migration crisis, security issues following September the 11th and the others, and it affects the way we view Bosniaks in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albanians and Kosovars, in as much as Albania and Kosovo are a separate issue when it comes to, and a rather complex one when it comes to the relationship between religion and the political institutions. And the other group are Serbs, based on the 1990s, the image that's been created in the 1990s, and based on their exceptionism when it comes to foreign policy, especially towards Russia and military neutrality and the so-called policy of 4 pillars. Now, when we take these two groups together, we actually have the grounds for prejudice and stereotypes about the Western Balkans. And therefore especially if there is no political will for further enlargement, I think there is a deliberate creation by the media under the influence of the nationalist views and by the right-wing politicians, and especially extreme right in the Western Balkans, against the Balkans, which is seen as an extension of Turkey, as something that does not belong to Europe, that is the security risk, in fact, security. And in reality is, however, what I said earlier, different. Reality is that actually in Bosnia and Herzegovina, one single shot has not been fired between various ethnic groups and their representatives 27 years following one of the most horrible wars in Europe, that is the war in Bosnia. The reality in the Balkans is that we have now finally, we have made a resolution, it seems, for the problem of Macedonian Orthodox Church, especially when it comes to the Serb Orthodox Church. After 50 years of this being a problem between two countries. So we had one positive step forward, in fact, in terms of regional cooperation and security, but it's not been reported, it's not been seen as a good news, because good news is not good news somehow. That's my feeling. And that's, and then also the Open Balkans, the project of regional cooperation, which is obviously supported by 70%, 76% of the people, were actually countries which were unlikely friends, such as Albania and Serbia, and jointly North Macedonia now, and possibly even Montenegro. they are developing regional cooperation. And in addition to that, in Serbia, we mentioned Serbia. I mean, Serbia used to have, in the last 3 years, practically a one-party parliament. And now it's no longer the case following this election. So we see some forms of democratization. Although, to be honest, I mean, if we look at the results of this survey, the fact that 21% of the people only actually believe political parties lead me to ask maybe a too provocative question. And this is whether these people have ever actually wanted multi-party, whether they have actually ever wanted a turn from the system as it was before 1990 into a system that we don't have political parties, but to agree, one really needs to open some of these fundamental questions. Although, as I said earlier, the fact that they say they don't support political parties doesn't mean they will not vote for them and for the same political parties every time. So that's where I find actually the problem. But at the same time, if I may say, there is a growing negative perception of European Union in the Western Balkans. And I think at the moment, the European Union is probably the least popular external power in the Western Balkans. Because it seems to me that, as I said earlier, more problems are being created to countries of the Western Balkans by member states of the European Union than it is the case the other way around. And with this, I mean, countries that block and veto, and the countries that also somehow hesitate to make a significant step towards integration, and therefore keep these countries waiting for far too long. And they, of course, they feel humiliated and excluded.
Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you also for reminding us about the Open Balkans process. And thank you also for this important soundbite that in reality in Bosnia, not a single shot has been fired. Speaking of creating panic, whereas the actual reality on the ground is different. Now, I'm very happy to open the floor. And should you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. Somebody will be coming towards you with the mic. Please also introduce yourselves and mention the words who the question is directed. Thank you so much. Please.
Is it on? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Petar Markovic. I'm the head of mission of Montenegro to the EU. I'd like to thank the RCC for giving this very, very important pulse checker for the Western Balkans. I think that having this regional perspective is very useful and illuminating, and I think the approach that you gave us, that the problems and issues that the region is facing are a priori also security challenges, if not tackled correctly, is very correct and illuminating. I would maybe comment in 3 arguments. One is that amalgamation, so this speaking as a region to the EU and to each other is something that we haven't had a few years back, and RCC is one of the important partners, along with CEFTA, etc., who allow us to speak in a regional voice. I think also what we've seen coming as initiatives from the European Union, and these are, inviting us to summits as Western Balkan leaders yesterday, inviting us to other forms of cooperation, all falling under the not yet fully fulfilled promise of accelerated integration and progressive integration, is another form of amalgamation, which is welcome. However, there is also a danger of amalgamation, not just in data, because it obscures the variance between countries, but also at how the EU perceives the Western Balkans. When you look at the support for EU membership, amalgamated at 60%, it obscures that in Montenegro that support is unwavering and is constantly between 70 and 80%, for example. Let's not be bleak. So the announcement of President Macron that the Regional Center for cybersecurity will open is a good point of amalgamation, of trying to tackle this problem regionally. And Montenegro is very proud that it has been chosen to be the headquarters of this regional center. The other A is the second day is anchoring. And I think the EU has done a lot to anchor the Western Balkans in its policies, but it has promised to do much more. And we are all eager to see this promise fulfilled. I think then this gap between us and the expectation gap that we are all disappointed with yesterday and today will shrink. And hopefully, if we amalgamate in a smart way, if we anchor in a more efficient and credible way, we will then finally accelerate. And this is something that we are still not seeing, accelerate the path of Western Balkan countries into the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these strong anchors on amalgamation and anchoring. And speaking of 2025 business expectations, or the recent, I believe, Greek proposal for 2033 and so on. So again, we should be, anchors are useful. The more we also complete what we say, the better for sentiments across the region. Thank you so much. Any further questions or comments from the room? Don't be shy. We have a silent consensus to move forward, right, towards the summary, and this way we're going to be, please.
Yeah, well, I'll just like
Please.
to mention something regarding the anchoring. You know, at least there was a good, I mean, of course, it was very important for Ukraine and Moldova, but I think it was very important that the slow process of the integration of the Western Balkans did not hinder the process for the Eastern Partnership countries, for Ukraine, because that was a risk to that. You know, the fatigue with the Western Balkans could have hindered the other two countries. So I still think there is movement out there, and I think the Western Balkan countries, as we have seen, the leaders should embrace it, that, you know, more countries are becoming candidates. Of course, there is disillusionment, especially for Kosovo, you know, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, North Macedonia. But at the end, you said that it is merit-based and it should stay like that. So we should move forward and not remember the merit-based enlargement process, and not forget.
Speaking of merits, I have to admit, as somebody who teaches global communications at university level, that we are competing for attention. And what Romania, for example, has tried as a lobbyist for Moldova for years, namely to assimilate in a way Moldova as a tiny country to the Western Balkans, did not succeed. But the Ukrainian war provided momentum, provided the attention, the spotlight needed, and so on. And the very fact that even after yesterday's focus on the Eastern Partnership Plus now, right, towards the EU, we're meeting today to talk about the Western Balkans. And if I were to summarize shortly, you know, as the last point of the debate, having, I would say, constructive, realistic, but also open, future-looking messaging on the EU side, right? Based on progress, but also, you know, depending on the political calendars of the autumn. I think also we can thank you, the French presidency. I think we can also count on the continuation of support from the Czechs, because
we should not forget for Moldova, the government also.
Yeah.
I mean, the focus on good governance reforms that the current government in Moldova has. So of course, Ukraine crisis played a role, but that remains also very important too.
Perceptions matter, and I think this is one of the reasons why, despite the diplomatic declarations, there is a gap of expectations, despite mutual feelings of closeness to the EU, between what the Moldovans feel and what the Georgians feel. Speaking of progress in government, and then we went more in depth into the data, right? And we connected issues linked to unemployment, issues linked to migration, and perceptions of opportunity or of threats. And I would like in context just to remind one issue, which I believe is a topic which is worth reminding, us being concrete, beyond all the sound bites, beyond all the topics and the formats, you know, let's get roaming done. And I know that this is one of the hot topics and important issues for the RCC-EU relationship, you know, and for the Western Balkans EU relationship. So I would like to thank so much RCC for organizing this event, to our EU institutional national speakers, and also to our great panelists for the contributions. And I'm very happy to welcome you for bilateral, trilateral, or multilateral talks over the cocktail outside. Yeah? Thank you so much.
Thank you.